across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is the Friday weekend edition. We have in studio with us today Dr. Merrill Matthews, Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty Institute. And it's kind of making a list of the things we're going to try to answer, all the questions. Is Zionism a Christian heresy? Can a mob veto a worship service? How much fraud is in Obamacare? How much fraud is in welfare payments? Is it racist to require a photo ID before you vote? Can illegal immigration exist if it occurs on stolen land? As well as should medical organizations change their policies on treating trans minors? And is Christian nationalism the greatest threat to America? That's just in 2 hours, but I think it illustrates the point. Kelly, we have talked about you, so it's good to have you back in the studio because the National Religious Liberty Commission is something we talked about, and then we started saying, who knew it was going to be so controversial? You have an interfaith group that is suing you. You have a member of the committee that sort of took over and got talking about an issue that we've written about recently, Zionism and anti-Semitism. So I just want to hear from an individual that was sitting right there at the podium. What's been going on?
Well, it's actually been pretty, I thought, wonderful and exciting and very positive through the first meetings until this last meeting. We had, of course, some shenanigans going on all on the same day. First, the lawsuit by, and I was like, when I heard about the lawsuit, I said, what attorney would sign their name to this ridiculous lawsuit? It was a lawsuit. Okay, think about this. The president has picked his own advisory committee to look in to the religious freedom issues in our country and what solutions there might be and to make recommendations to him. So the president is picking who will advise him. And somebody's brought a lawsuit to say, I don't think your panel, your committee is balanced enough because there's mostly Christians. It's like, well, there's mostly Christians in the United States. Okay, there's Christians, there's rabbis, there's we've got a Muslim on the advisory committee. We've had different people testify, but that's not good enough because the people that brought the lawsuit, the head guy on the lawsuit is a homosexual man minister who I don't even know what denomination, who's saying that there should be more people like them. It's like, what is the committee supposed to be, like 10 million in order to cover all of these anomalies that are out there? It's ridiculous. The president can obviously pick who he wants to advise him. There is actually great balance. We've got Catholic, we got Protestant, we got Jewish, we got people testifying from different faiths, all faiths. And it's been really positive until both the lawsuit, which is silly, I think, and will be thrown out eventually. And then what happened in the actual hearing. I mean, it was a hearing on the first 2/3 of the hearing was really on anti-Semitism
right.
and what's happening around the country, including some of our cases at First Liberty where synagogues are being persecuted. It's just ridiculous, the stuff going on. And two of the people who testified were, everybody's seen the Minnesota deal where they come in and disrupt the church service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had that case before Minnesota happened. It was in San Diego area,
right.
Carlsbad. And so those people testified. And it was just sad to me to see, especially a lot of the folks who were testifying. It's scary to come and testify. You're kind of putting yourself out there, and especially people who've been victimized, to come and tell their story, and then to have somebody decide that for their own purposes they're going to hijack it and just treat them with great disrespect and attack all of them when they didn't do anything. And so that, of course, commissioner has now been removed from the commission because nobody is supposed to try to take this over and make it about their religion or their beliefs or their politics. It's about religious freedom for everybody.
I might just mention we do have an article, of course, the National Religious Liberty Commission, also then one on the removal of the commission member, which you have written about. And as we mentioned before, the first Liberty Insider, that goes into some more detail because I think most people don't know about the Mission Church in Carlsbad, California, where that took place. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, for just a minute, let's talk about this because we've been talking about this before Kelly walked in, and there's just a lot of issues, aren't there?
There are a lot of issues, and it's appropriate for the commission to be looking at this because for the last 3 or 4 years, not so much lately, but for the last 3 or 4 years, we had a real anti-Semitic response in the country that was shutting down businesses, inflicting damage, property damage, chasing Jews at colleges. They had to get lock themselves into rooms in order to keep from getting captured. It's perfectly appropriate to look at this. And so I guess I'm surprised because you're doing several meetings, and the notion that you sort of highlighting this one lady tries to take over on this issue, and especially as I still don't understand her argument. I'm trying to understand what she's talking about with Christ and Catholicism and anti-Semitism, and I just don't quite understand it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the Catholics don't understand what she's saying either. She's a convert. She was a Protestant, sort of Reformed theology, and then jumped ship from there to Catholicism 22 weeks ago. And so there's been a lot of responses from Catholics saying that's not what Catholics believe. And so this is part of the problem. It shouldn't be about your religious beliefs, now, I think what in general she was ultimately trying to do in part, I think her main thing was to increase her social media account and coverage.
Sure she did.
Reminds me a lot of what we've seen Candace Owens doing, stuff that I think is really unfortunate, but gets your numbers up and gets you more money. And she was trying to make the point somehow that you can be against Zionism and still not be anti-Semitic. And depending upon how you define Zionism, I mean, this is one of the problems. If what you mean is that, Israel should not be allowed to exist, then I think you got problems because no other faith or group of people do you say that about, yet it's only Jewish people that you say that about. I think you got a problem. But if you're pulling back less than that and you're defining Zionism as, well, I just don't agree with everything Israel does, well, that's fine. Yeah, you don't have to agree with everything Israel does. Yeah. But the problem with this is a lot of times people who say that they're it's just they're anti-Zionism, but they're not anti-Semitic. It follows with the views that Candace Owens expressed that came up in the hearing that are just vile anti-Semitism.
And you can, if through the book The Chosen and the film The Chosen, you'll find that Orthodox Jews at one point were opposed to Zionism because they thought the Messiah was supposed to take them back to Israel. So they were actually, in some ways, opposed to Zionism.
Yes.
Well, let me just mention that the booklet we sent out in February is on Zionism, and of course it has some quotes from Michael Radelnick and Michael Brown and even Ralph Reed. So if you are a Truth Team member, you've already read that. If you'd like to get a copy, I think we've made it available on the website. But it's just a good example, some of the things that surfaced in the hearing. We come back, I want to talk just briefly about the other aspect, because as we mentioned, we've seen attacks on churches in Minnesota and California. Is that preview of coming attractions? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about social media and the teen brain. Today, I'd like to talk about social media and the impact on teenagers' mental health. An article in Axios reminds the reader that experts have been increasingly warning of a connection between heavy social media use and mental health issues in children. Apparently, there are lawsuits against social media producers that accuse them of contributing to a youth mental health crisis. Now, one of the experts quoted is Jean Twenge, who I've quoted in previous commentaries. She is a psychology professor at San Diego State University and leading expert on the subject. Here are just a few of her findings. There is a substantial link to depression, and that link tends to be stronger among girls. The amount of time spent on social media also has an effect. The more time the teen, particularly a teen girl, spends using social media, the more likely it is that she will be depressed. Jean Twenge is probably best known for her book, iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy. She describes how digital technology has shaped Generation Z, which is why she calls them iGen. Social media harms teens in 4 ways. First, social comparison. Everyone else's life looks more glamorous online. Second, displacement, because teens spend too much time online instead of with family and friends. Third, algorithms prod them towards unhealthy content. Fourth is pornography, which is reaching kids at younger ages. These recent studies should concern parents and provide them with sufficient motivation to control their family's media input, and pastors and youth leaders should also take note and warn their congregation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about Zionism, anti-Semitism. We have a lot more to cover, but again, maybe you have a comment or a question since Kelly was there at the meeting. But since then, also one of the other things that you did talk about, and this is in the second page of the particular insider report, the First Liberty Insider, and I encourage people to get a copy of it, is you say America's always protected lawful protests, it's never protected persecution. And the free exercise clause, as you said, means little if mobs can intimidate Americans into silence inside their own sanctuaries. And for most people, they may know what happened in Minnesota and think that was a one-off. But the testimony that you have there is to remind people that's also happened in California.
Absolutely. We've got a case, Mission Church is our client in the Christian and Jewish Alliance. This is some Christians, pastors, forming friendships with Jewish people in the community, and getting together, and there's pro-Palestine protesters who didn't like this, so they literally came inside the church and disrupted their service, shouting and doing all kinds of things. And then as long as that wasn't enough, they then came back on Easter with bullhorns, screaming some of the most vile things to the children that were there. I mean, it's just horrible, and disrupting their service where it was so loud that you can't even hear in your own building. So, and the police had to come out and all this. Again, in this country, you do have a right to peaceful protest. You don't have a right to disrupt other people's First Amendment rights, including the right to freedom of worship, free exercise of religion, the freedom of assembly. So we have a federal law, the FACE Act, which makes it, number one, a crime, but number two, you can also bring a civil suit against them. And we have done that at First Liberty. We had a case just a few years ago in Florida where Jane's Due Process and these groups vandalized the crisis pregnancy centers, which were religiously based.
Right.
And we filed those suits and won those suits against them. So that's what's happening here. They're now trying to intimidate and shut down a worship service, very much like what you saw in Minnesota. And we filed a lawsuit in federal court. Now, we don't know yet there whether the Department of Justice is also going to bring a criminal action. We think they should, but either way, we've brought a civil suit, and the law is on the side of the church.
We probably should mention with regard to the disruptor at the commission that over 2,000 years, the church has taken a different view of its view on Jews, and Jerusalem has evolved over some years. I mean, is it still alive, or are Israel still part of the chosen people of God, or are they not? Is that the church now? And that's evolved, and it's evolved among denominations too. So you can, if you're critical of this, you can go back and probably find a theologian somewhere which will agree with you. So you just we're in a different place now than we have been at some times in the past over the past 2,000 years.
I was just thinking, Kelly, if we put this in perspective, I quoted the other day, this came from Bill Federer, that there was a case where James Madison was noticing that they had some protest in a church there in Virginia, and that was one of the reasons why he actually instituted in the Virginia legislature protection of churches. Of course, now we have the FACE Act, but I can remember in the past where if you took a strong stand on the issue of homosexuality, remember some of the individuals going into churches spilling blood over the AIDS issue, but now it's almost anything with an I. It's Israel, it's ICE, it's immigration. I mean, and in some respects, your church could possibly face some kind of issue, and this is why if we don't deal with this soon, the kind of disruption that I experienced many times on college campuses will start happening in a church next to you.
Absolutely. It's why it's important for the DOJ to do what they did in Minnesota, that there needs to be a criminal action against those involved. And same with Mission Church and what we're doing in California as well. I mean, people might think they can do that until a couple of people get held accountable under the law. And then people realize, ooh, maybe that's not a great way to protest, and violate the law, engage in criminal activity. But right now it seems to be something that they think, works. Of course, we've seen a lot of visual imagery of people doing things that were not legal, interfering with an officer, whether it's a state or federal officer, when they're trying to actually conduct an activity, maybe arresting someone or whatever. I mean, number one, it's really foolish, but number two, it's illegal. And so we're seeing this in the church. What was funny to me was this comment that, we're exercising our First Amendment right.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that. Bring it up.
And I'm like, look, you have a right to peacefully protest, but you don't have a right to peacefully protest inside my home. In fact, in many states, you could be shot dead, including Texas. So that's number one, it's really stupid. But number two, it's not a First Amendment right. The First Amendment is your right against the government. The government can't tell you can't say something. But a private citizen on their own land can say whatever they want. They can say, I don't want people with your views on my land. And certainly, when you're not only doing that on somebody's private property, but you're doing it to disrupt a religious service, which is a fundamental constitutional First Amendment right. It's both free speech, it's freedom of religion, it's freedom of assembly. I mean, we're hitting a bunch of them at the same time. Then you're violating somebody else's rights, and you just can't do that. So, I mean, I think most people realize you have a right to protest in public. You don't have a right to invade a church or a synagogue or a house of worship and disrupt the service. And certainly, I don't know if people saw the indictment in Minnesota. It was just horrific. I mean, screaming in children's faces. These are adults screaming in children's faces that your parents are going to hell. One of the boys, when he came out, this is in the indictment, said, I thought my parents were dead.
Yes. Because
they've seen people come into churches and shoot up churches. And they were intentionally and specifically keeping the parents from getting to the Sunday school to get their children.
And wouldn't let them out of the church either.
Yeah. So I not only am I glad that they are prosecuting this, but I hope they get a great jury that just puts it to these people, because they deserve the full extent of the punishment on this.
There's one other aspect to the First Amendment, which is the freedom of the press, and Don Lemon is claiming that he's a journalist, and so therefore he's not guilty on anything because he's a journalist in there, though he's participating, and it raises a couple of questions. Don Lemon used to be a journalist, but now he claims to be an independent journalist who does a blog. So if you claim to be an independent journalist who does a blog, are you really a journalist with freedom of the press protections? And if you're participating, because in journalism ethics, there's always this question of, if you're a journalist seeing something happen, do you intervene, or is it your job to stay out of this and just cover it?
Yes.
And if you're intervening, then you sort of raise other questions that, especially here, he didn't have to intervene. He did intervene. So it raises a question about, are you really a journalist? And does the First Amendment protect you if you're actually intervening in certain things that you shouldn't be intervening in?
He was part of the planning.
Yes.
He was with them planning. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, would anybody think that a journalist could be part of the planning in a murder and just go along with it, or a bank robbery? Oh, no, I was just here as a journalist.
Yeah.
That's not going to get you very far.
That's not. And you did raise the question about shooting. We have in the past have done some programs about protecting churches because we've had some of the shooting situations. And the other day I had a chance to hear from an individual that has spent years as a Secret Service agent protecting presidents, vice presidents, cabinet members, including some individuals that we talked about just the other day, Scott Turner and others, being protected right now. And he's now providing church protection. And you just recognize if you come in and people are shouting and screaming, the very first thing you're going to do is reach for your sidearm. I mean, even if you don't draw it, you think it could be a shooting. And the fact that this happened in Minnesota or California, I hate to think what would happen if it happened in Texas or Louisiana or Alabama or something like
Minnesota
that.
Minnesota has a very robust gun-carrying community there.
So it could have gone bad very quickly. So nevertheless, I wanted you to know about that. As you always know, we encourage you to find out some more about First Liberty Institute. And, of course, the special issue that just came out today, First Liberty Insider, goes into some of the things that happen in the commission as well as what is happening right now in some of the churches, updated rules on prayer in public schools. It's very good. I would encourage you to sign up for it, and we'll come back. We have a lot of fraud to talk about. That coming up right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now. Or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Merrill Matthews, Kelly Shackelford in studio, and we're going to talk about fraud for a while. We talked about it briefly in the first part of the week, but I said I couldn't wait to get Dr. Merrill Matthews in here. First of all, I might hold up his book, which is entitled America Faces the Entitlements Cliff, Chapter 7, Healthcare Debacle. And that was written, 7 years ago? Mm-hmm. And the other day, I was reading on the air, Dr. Matthews Matthews, a report from the GAO 6 years ago about Obamacare fraud, and then read the most recent one, and it's almost the same. So it seems to me that we keep hearing people saying, I want to deal with waste, fraud, and abuse. We saw how well that went with Doge, didn't we? But it seems to me that this particular editor says, Obamacare fraud is real. It's time to get serious about fixing it.
One of the things that was brought up by the Paragon Institute, which is a think tank in Florida, and sort of one of the leading healthcare think tanks from a conservative standpoint, is they identified roughly 6 million people that they said are enrolled in Obamacare but got no healthcare services in a year. So, and when I first saw that, and they're assuming most of this is our fraud, ghosts. They're not actually people. And I called some friends who are still actively engaged in this, and two things to it. Number one, young, healthy people, and a lot of people in Obamacare are young, healthy, oftentimes go a whole year without seeing any doctor, getting any health care. When I was in the 20s, I almost never went to see a doctor for anything. So I suspect some of that 6 million are people who are just young and healthy and just don't go see a doctor. However, what happened under Obamacare is Obama and Biden have funneled out billions of dollars to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to help enroll people in Obamacare. So they get money up front to do this, and then they get a little money for each one they enroll. And there is some speculation that some of these people are just creating people who don't actually exist, or dead people or other things, and enrolling them in Obamacare. Obamacare numbers never were as big as Obama thought they would be. They essentially, the biggest part of the numbers were an expansion of Medicaid, but you do have people in the Obamacare exchanges, and there is an economic incentive for people to enroll people from the liberal standpoint, because the money that the government was handing out to the NGOs, these were largely liberal groups that supported Obama and Biden. And so it's one way that you help fund the groups that support you, but also it could end up leading to people who are ghosts and never really existed when they enrolled them.
60,000 dead people right off the bat here on the Obamacare, when we haven't even gotten to welfare reform and all the kinds of things there. Kelly Shackelford, I was just thinking about the fact that one of the big pushes which gave us the longest shutdown in American history was because some of the Democrats said, we want these enhanced subsidies, and we found out some of those enhanced subsidies were going to people that didn't even exist.
Yeah, I'm just shocked that there's fraud in government, and there ought to be. There's a lot of, very creative people in Congress and in politics. I don't understand why they can't come up with mechanisms to catch this. Yeah. Just a few come to mind, which is I've got to think that they're, let's use Elon Musk and all of his really brilliant computer guys to come up with some sort of, I don't know, you could use AI or whatever, but to just, fiscally, you should be able to go through these different programs and find anomalies, things that don't make sense, compare them with some other data that's available publicly. Or, just the old-fashioned way, you could make it to where any citizen who exposes this kind of fraud gets a cut in what they save the government. You could hire full-time people who their job is to go through all of these programs and find the fraud. And you would save, the American taxpayer, billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I don't understand why we're not doing it.
So just think about the 60,000 that are dead. So if you enrolled in Obamacare and you died during that year, if you don't go and do something, change it, they will automatically enroll you in the next program. It's a rollover. So if there's not a good mechanism for the federal government or the insurance company to find out that you died, they just assume you're living. If you're not filing any claims, that's, they don't necessarily see that as a problem. So, and I'll add that the government systems, their computer systems, are very old and very out of date. And this goes to where Elon Musk could come in and do something to help out with that. And I'll just add one more problem. President Trump has said we ought to take these subsidies that we're giving them and just give the money to the individual rather than the insurance company.
There you go.
And I'm not in principle, I'm a supportive of that. The problem is, you want to see people coming out claiming Obamacare. You take federal government money. This isn't like the normal money from an employer puts in or an individual puts into, say, a health savings account. It's the federal government making this money available. You would find people coming out of the woodwork, what we call the woodwork effect, now claiming that they would be eligible for it, and you just open up the door for more fraud. So from my standpoint, until we figure out how to handle the fraud, I'm reluctant to hand several $1,000s over to individuals in an account, because you would just open up the doors for more fraud.
It's kind of like our old line, let's close the border before we talk about immigration reform, that kind of thing. But back to the point you made just a minute ago, the second article we have here by John Stossel, and it's a really good video to watch because it helps you understand, back to Kelly's question, that we have poor record keeping because we're still relying on rules and regulations written for pen and paper. And Elon Musk even points out, and we have some pictures of these just stacks and stacks of file cabinets full of written records. And none of us, you all work with different ministries and organizations, none of us keep records that way anymore, but the federal government does.
Yeah. It's just, it's one of the many, many problems with government. I think part of the problem here, too, is that this stuff is so big that nobody can keep up with it.
Right.
And but there needs to be solutions. Number one, and this is one of the problems we've watched over the past even year, as the president came in and you had things like these things being exposed, the $30 billion put into a slush account, right? And was that the EPA or somewhere? I forget. I think it was.
EPA?
Where are the prosecutions of people?
That's the big question.
That's something that many, on the conservative side are complaining about, because, it's clear that there's a lot of criminal activity going on here, but people the DOJ at least seems to have a hard time being able to prosecute them. Now, there are other things they've been doing very quickly, and they haven't succeeded. They've had grand juries, refuse to indict on things. They've had U.S. attorneys been declared to be not properly in place. They've gone quickly on some things, but man, on the things that the American people are like, I want to see some activity here, because it's clear this is criminal activity going on, especially in Minnesota. And there needs to be prosecutions.
And if you did, I think Trump would get a lot of play with the public if he was prosecuting these things, and you found out some of these stories of people. And that's it. We're talking about Obamacare, but it's Medicare. It's Medicaid is rampant. You've got the welfare programs, the SNAP programs. There is all kinds of programs out there that can be gamed by people who know what they're doing. And, from a bureaucrat standpoint, if I'm seeing 60,000 people that may be dead in 24 million people in Obamacare, is that, is that big of a deal to me if I'm that word? And if I go and expose it and somebody criticizes me of something, then do I take the blame? And then do I want to do that as a bureaucrat? Bureaucrats oftentimes don't want to shuffle the ruffle feathers because they end up getting accused of doing something bad.
You've talked about block grants. Is that maybe a possible solution?
Republicans have been supporting block grants. Why they've not done this, I don't know. But the idea is saying this is your Medicaid money or this is your welfare money, or maybe you combine them and say this is how much you're getting. We're giving you a block grant to the state. It's your money. You're not getting any more from the federal government for this. You figure out how you want to distribute it and put it on them. And that way the states don't have a way to game the system to get more money, but you also turn it over to the states and force them to be efficient or take the blame if they're not.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, if you'd like to weigh in on questions about fraud, certainly the case. Thought afterwards we'd talk about voter fraud, because if nothing else, that's another piece by Cal Thomas, and it is something that we will be talking about because we are encouraging you to eventually take some action on what is a very important piece of legislation, and we certainly want to spend some time talking about that. And if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about everything from Obamacare fraud and welfare fraud and all sorts of other entitlement fraud. No wonder we're falling off the entitlements cliff. We'll be right back.
At this year's D.C. March for Life, Vice President J.D. Vance announced the historic expansion of the Mexico City policy, which prevents federal funds from going to groups that perform abortions overseas. Pro-life administrations have maintained and reinstated the Mexico City policy since President Reagan initiated it in 1984. When pro-abortion presidents enter office, they rescind it. The edict sets the tone for the values the American government will export in its foreign policy, in effect answering the question, will we consistently promote a culture of life? The Center for Family and Human Rights, CFAM, states that the Trump administration's sweeping new rules close funding loopholes in previous versions of the Mexico City policy and triple the amount of foreign aid affected by the restrictions. The new policy extends beyond abortion-related aid. CFAM's Lisa Correnti reports that as of February 26, 3 directives will go into effect addressing abortion, gender ideology, and DEI, respectively. Collectively, these will comprise the Promoting Human Flourishing and Foreign Assistance policy. Vice President Vance told the marchers that the Biden administration sought to export abortion and radical gender ideology all around the world. He says that's not our job. It's our job to promote families and human flourishing. The new directive on gender ideology prohibits funding for sex-rejecting procedures or sex-rejecting social transition for children and adults. Lisa Correnti explains that the ban includes any resources or counseling that advises this treatment for gender dysphoria and all promotion of gender ideology through lobbying, education, public campaigns, drag queen shows, or any other means. According to the new directive on DEI, U.S. foreign assistance will not go to any programs that treat people as members of preferred or disfavored groups rather than individuals. Opponents call the new policy an attempt at global social engineering. The sexual left is appalled at being deprived of the pot of money they were using to bully developing countries into adopting their life-destroying agenda. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about voter fraud. This is a booklet we did years ago on voter fraud, and boy, I need to update that one for sure, if for no other reason than just even yesterday we were talking with Donald Eason. He's with CURE, which was an organization started by Star Parker. He's now the president, and I had just asked him, and we had talked about this the other day with a piece that came out from Colonel Alan West about whether or not asking for a photo ID at an election area, whether that is Jim Crow. And of course, you know what the answer was to both of our African Americans. But this is the whole issue that Cal Thomas is talking about, because if indeed you don't want individuals who are here illegally, then if you quote from Peter Schweitzer, who we're going to get him on again, talking about his book, The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon, this has gone from being a slight problem to what could be a very significant problem. Your thoughts?
Yes, and you talked about in there about the issue of Spanish. A number of the people who vote can't speak English, and so he's raising the question as to whether or not they're citizens if they can't speak English, because there's a test required that you be able to do basic English. I went and looked at the immigration services, and they actually have exemptions there. If you are 50 or older and you've been here 20 years, you don't have to take the test, the English test. Oh. If you're 55 and you've been here 15 years and you've got a green card, you don't have to take the English test. And it even mentions in there, if you can't speak English very well, we'll have an interpreter there to help you with the questions that you're filling out on the test. But you are supposed to be able to, for most people, you're supposed to be able to speak a basic English. But in looking at some of the law firms that help, they say in there, it's not a real hard test.
No, it isn't.
Depending upon the person who's testing you, they have a lot of leeway. So there may be that requirement. I'm not sure that it's enforced that much.
Kelly, this is of concern because we know that not too many people are voting here illegal, but we know some are. Mm-hmm. And I've had Don Huffines on this program, sitting right across where you were sitting right now, and he was state senator. Now he's run for comptroller, and he was able to identify all sorts of people just in Dallas County alone that had not only voted illegally, but had voted illegally for decades. And so obviously we still have a bit of a problem here.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, and there's just no reason to not have these things, right? I mean, I'm trying to think, is there anybody anywhere in the country that doesn't have to have an ID? I mean, you can't live in our society and go anywhere without having an ID. I mean, it's crazy to say, and of course, this is what the poll shows.
Yes.
Right? I mean, oh, well, it's minorities. No, it's not. Minorities are, 83%?
Supportive of it.
Yeah, supportive of having IDs. And so they don't want their vote stolen by somebody who's not real, just like everybody else. So this is one of those weird issues that's like 80-20 or 90-10 in favor of the Democrats. I mean, in favor of the Republicans. But when you get into the legislature, it's like 100% of the Democrats are against it.
This is a losing issue for the Democrats. I don't know why they hold on to this, because you have to present your ID just about anywhere you go.
Yes.
And so the notion that you can't vote because you don't have an ID, and there are some people who don't have them, but it's a fairly small number, and most states that have the ID requirement have made certain kind of ways for you to be able to get some kind of identification, even if it's not a driver's license or something of that nature. So I don't know why Democrats persist on this.
I don't either.
The 3 points of this act is, number one,
the SAVE Act, I guess.
ID. Yeah, SAVE Act. ID. Okay, everybody's in favor of that. Mm-hmm. Make sure that they're a citizen. Okay. Don't think there's much dispute on that one.
Not much problem there.
And then the third one is that you can't just do mail-in voting.
Right.
That you can if you're disabled or in the military, or, the kind of, things that we have where you actually have to put under oath that you're out of the country because of blah or whatever. But not this just flooding the mailboxes with mail-in voting. Mm-hmm. And those are just real simple things. What's funny is there's old lawsuits that were filed where the Democrats were the one arguing that the most dangerous to voter fraud
Judge Ho talked about that,
are mail-in voting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so all of this is kind of basic, and I think the people of the country, so I'm with Merrill. I don't understand. This is, again, why do the Democrats keep fighting over loser issues? These 80-20 issues, transgenderism and all these different things that aren't working.
And I just mentioned, if you want to look at this, Heritage Foundation has a website. I think it's called a Heritage Election Fraud. You can go there, and they have a picture of the country, and they can show you the fraud cases that have been filed over the years. They go back to 1982 to 2025. It's not a huge number, and most of them, when you look at them, are not big numbers. But sometimes, and they oftentimes, these are prosecutions and convictions, and sometimes it's people who are trying to register people who are don't exist, and other things of that nature. Interestingly, there's about 8 states, I think, that are mostly mail-in voting. Utah's one. It's one of the least fraud-prone ones, at least according to the Heritage Foundation on there. But
Oregon, I think, is mail-in voting.
I've had election commissioners tell me the one thing that keeps them up at night is the mail-in ballots, because he said once we no longer have the chain of custody, you don't know what happens there.
And again, in our booklet, and this one is many, many years old, I mentioned the Heritage Foundation database, which back then were thousands. And these were, as they pointed out, because Hans von Spakovsky and John Fund, who you and I both have interviewed before, have pointed out that this wasn't even an extensive database. These were just the ones that were in the news. And over the last year or so, let me just mention the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Ken Paxton, he's been able to prosecute some of those individuals because there hasn't been as much of an impetus. If you're actually a district attorney in a county and you know there's some voter fraud, but it didn't really affect the election, or you don't have the manpower to check it out, that one goes pretty far down the list when you're dealing with burglaries and assaults and things like that. And so because there's not a lot of accountability, that's the case. But I, again, just don't even understand how you could even make the case, because our listeners in Georgia know the story. A number of years ago, they passed some very good election integrity laws, which then caused the Major League Baseball to take the All-Star game out of Atlanta to Denver. And you had the president of Delta saying, well, this is terrible that they're requiring ID when you require ID to get on his airplanes. And it turns out that after that next election, they had record turnout for minorities.
And Georgia has done a comparison of those, and it found that there was, if I remember right, something like 30 or 40 people who were not here as citizens who looked like they may have voted. They went and checked, and only 11 or 12 of them actually had. And there was something like 152 cases. They said, we don't know what's happened, so we're going to go check it. So it's a small number, but it does happen.
Yes, and again, a couple of elections have been rather close. Can
and
you remember those?
Georgia's been good at trying to make sure it's checking these things. Not every state is.
Well, again, I just think we will next week have as our action alert the SAVE Act. It first of all was passed by the House last April, and then they passed it again just recently. And of course, it's just languishing there in the United States Senate because the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says, "Well, this is just Jim Crow 1.0, 2.0. Please explain." We're going to take a break. We have a lot of other things to talk about, but again, if you find some of these conversations or some of these articles relevant on the National Religious Liberty Commission, some of the fraud, those are all on the website. When we come back, we'll get into a couple of other issues, some that we've been looking at. AMA and others have changed their attitude towards transgenderism. What's the greatest threat to America? I guess it's not Sharia law. It must be Christian nationalism. We'll take a break. Be right back.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we have in studio with us Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Hold up the booklet that we did a while back on transgenderism. And on Monday, we did spend some time talking about that with Dr. Kathy Cook, who is with Celebrate Kids, and Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries, because they have written a book called Raising Gender Confident Kids. And one of the things we mentioned just in passing, and Jeff Myers mentioned that, is the fact that we now have a lawsuit. And at the same time, we then went back and spent some time talking about the fact that both, first of all, plastic surgeons, and then the next day, the AMA, American Medical Association, changed its position on surgery. And I think, Dr. Merrill Matthews, a lot of that has to do with a lawsuit. And you were predicting that years ago when you did one of the interviews on this.
I think it has to do with a lawsuit and an awareness that the tide is changing. Mm-hmm. So the AMA came out with this statement essentially saying, well, we never really supported surgery for those under, say, 18 or 19. We supported a patient being able to work with their doctor for the best care and so forth, but we never really supported that. that was not the perception out there in the country. That virtually all of the, I say all, most of the major medical associations that had anything to do with surgery or were generally supportive of the transgender surgery and felt like they were backing that. And so the AMA had, I think it's fair to say that some of them probably had a nuanced statement on these things, so that if things change, they could come back and say, well, we never actually really supported that. I mean, we were always supportive of generally adults, but we're seeing the tides change now. And this first major jury's award, $2 million. And once that happens, the malpractice insurance companies are going to be looking at this and saying, are we going to back doctors who are performing these, because we could be in on the hook for millions of dollars of fines and penalties.
Yeah, I've always felt like, and I knew some of the people who started the first law firm to deal with this stuff. I always felt like if a jury got this, it wouldn't go well for the people involved on the other side. The doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, basically, terrorizing their parents to say they're going to commit suicide if you don't do these really mutilization surgery on their children, and telling the children that they need to do all this, making millions of dollars off of them, and changing their life in a way that they can never never go back. Boy, I can imagine showing pictures of the person when they were young and how young and vulnerable they were, even if now they're 18 or 19 or whatever, and then talking about what they're going through. And I think $2 million has got to be. Oh, I thought it's going to end up being the lowest thing we see.
Wow.
And so, I think as usual, as a lawyer, the lawyers come to the rescue.
Well, what was interesting is that the groups that do this, there's a lot of clinics and hospitals and so forth that do this, and they've always taken the position, we're very careful with these patients. We make sure that they understand the risk and so forth, and we don't necessarily push them. As these patients are coming out forth and giving testimony under oath, they're providing a completely different scenario for what we heard from the groups, that they were rushed through. They were able to go in there in 30 minutes, their own puberty blockers, or they're moving hormone drugs and other things very quickly with no real expertise or no real consideration that this might be a phase they're going through. And this is what some of the people are coming back and saying. I was going through a phase, and I was just wrong in my phase, but they went ahead and encouraged me. They threatened my parents, in essence, with this notion that I might commit suicide, and my parents didn't want that to happen, so they went along with it.
The other thing this reminds me of is the COVID vaccine and the masks and everything else, because the first study done by Lisa Littman, she is a professor at Brown University, was one where she said, this doesn't make any sense. Brown University's in Rhode Island, and they found a number of girls in this one small town in Rhode Island that all were coming out as transgender. And she says, this has got to be social contagion. Well, I was at a men's retreat a while back, and one of the people there was a professor at Brown University, and talked about how they vilified her, criticized her, removed all her research, called her a hard right individual, and says, I'm a Democrat. I've never voted for a Republican in my life. I'm a feminist, but that, and then of course, these are people that Ryan Anderson sits on the committee. When Harry became Sally, well, they wouldn't even allow that to be published in some places. Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, that was not allowed to be sold at, a number of different places, but Target was one of those. And so after a while, anybody that was trying to inject even a little bit of common sense into this issue of transgenderism, you really paid a pretty heavy price, didn't you?
Yeah, I think a lot of people lost respect for the medical community. I know I have in the last, 6 years. And it's sad because, I remember when my wife was going through stage 3 breast cancer. Just brutal stuff that she had to go through, the chemo, the radiation, and everything. And at the very end, all they would tell her is there is no evidence of disease. It wasn't your cancer is gone. They said what they knew they could say. And so for them to sort of get into ideology and push that over what the science would really show, and what anybody with common sense would know with kids, I think they've really damaged themselves, and they've. There needs to be some courage. I mean, there are a number of courageous people that stood up. I think of Dr. McCullough. I think of
Matt Walsh, maybe.
Yeah, Matt Walsh. I think of even during the COVID thing, what is it?
Yeah.
I forget how to pronounce his name. It's long. He's now like with the FDA or something. Right?
Yeah. I couldn't think of it.
There's people like that, but I mean, some people need to rise up in the medical community to make sure that this kind of stuff stops. We'd like to be able to rely upon them as scientists, not as political ideologues. And that's what they become, or they've allowed versions, the parts of the medical community to become, and then to not allow there to be discussion, to look at the facts. Instead, they punish people that disagree. That's not how it's supposed to be.
And the irony here is that I think half the states or so have outlawed genital mutilation laws.
Yes.
And you cannot, in those states, even if a parent wants you to do this, is willing to consent, they can't do it for own children. So it's the kind of thing where you think, well, isn't that kind of what's going on here? And instead, the left was all about ending the genital mutilation, but they were all for the transgender surgeries.
Yeah.
I've never understood that.
Well, we're taking a break. When we come back, though, I want to raise that question because it's a very good one. You have certain states that say, well, I'm a sanctuary state, so we will not obey federal law in terms of immigration. You have certain states, and I'm thinking, again, Minnesota. Why does it always pop up there? The governor saying, or California, if you cannot get a trans surgery in your state, you can come to ours. Mm-hmm. And so what about that? We're going to talk about that with our guests right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about social media and the teen brain. Today, I'd like to talk about social media and the impact on teenagers' mental health. An article in Axios reminds the reader that experts have been increasingly warning of a connection between heavy social media use and mental health issues in children. Apparently, there are lawsuits against social media producers that accuse them of contributing to a youth mental health crisis. Now, one of the experts quoted is Jean Twenge, who I've quoted in previous commentaries. She is a psychology professor at San Diego State University and leading expert on the subject. Here are just a few of her findings. There is a substantial link to depression, and that link tends to be stronger among girls. The amount of time spent on social media also has an effect. The more time the teen, particularly a teen girl, spends using social media, the more likely it is that she will be depressed. Jean Twenge is probably best known for her book, iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy. She describes how digital technology has shaped Generation Z, which is why she calls them iGen. Social media harms teens in 4 ways. First, social comparison. Everyone else's life looks more glamorous online. Second, displacement, because teens spend too much time online instead of with family and friends. Third, algorithms prod them towards unhealthy content. Fourth is pornography, which is reaching kids at younger ages. These recent studies should concern parents and provide them with sufficient motivation to control their family's media input, and pastors and youth leaders should also take note and warn their congregation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me, if I can, just put on the table one of the issues, and we've seen this idea of a sanctuary state and a sanctuary city, and that is in the area of immigration, and we certainly have questions about that, because if indeed this is the law of the land, we'll go and change the law. Don't say that we're not going to work with various immigration officials, yet nevertheless, Tom Homan says, okay, we're coming out of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Well, then this other one, in terms of transgender, is the same way. You have various governors in various states say, if you're in one of those states which bans abortion, which we're going to talk about later because of Penedexter's commentary, or bans transgender surgery, just come to our state to do that. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, that is becoming an issue, and I would love to get the legal issue, but I'd love just to get the practical issue, because you sit on ethics committees and things like that. Why is it allowed in one state and not another? Why is it considered best practice in one state and actually illegal in another? That's a very important question.
The states can pass these things generally, unless you get federal law that outlaws it.
Yeah.
The states can do that, and some of the states, just as they are with sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, they're trying to make a statement that they're trying to show that they are the most liberal or most progressive of the states out there, and they're liable to end up having the most lawsuits in the state because of that happening within the state. So this is another thing where I just don't understand why the left is as strong for it as like the voter ID. I just don't understand why you are that strong. And some people, as you know, J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, is a liberal woman who's been opposed to this, and she's taken a lot of flack for doing it.
Yeah. Again, just why you want to die on that hill, I do not know. But there's some legal issues here. Don't we have a supremacy clause in the Constitution? Maybe not.
We do. There's sort of two things at work, which is, number one is, the states were supposed to be the laboratories, of the whole idea of having states is that they could do something different. And that, it's sort of the marketplace of ideas. And then they go, oh, that state's really benefiting from that thing they're doing, so we'll do that over here. So there certainly is a right, states' rights, and the ability to come up with their own legislation, their own approach is true. But they do not have the ability to violate federal law. What they're doing in these places, where they say they're sanctuaries, is they are just not helping the federal government, enforce those laws. So, for instance, out in, which, by the way, this is complete idiocy when it comes to what they're doing with immigration. I mean, I don't know if you probably run through these statistics when I wasn't here, but I mean, we have the lowest murder rate in 123 years.
Yeah, murder rate's been dropping.
Yeah, and why is that? Well, I mean, now they're saying midnight basketball or whatever. Every police chief's got a different explanation. But you know what? When it happens everywhere, maybe it's something that's not to your local community, and everybody knows what it is. It's the deportations of all these criminals,
right?
And so it helps your community to get rid. You would think that every community, including Minnesota, would want to work with. If we've got somebody in jail for something else, but they're on your list because they actually, are a rapist or a child abuser or, what you name it, violent assault, whatever, you would want to say, hey, ICE, they're here. You come take them. Let's get rid of them. It's just bizarre to me that they would say, no, we refuse to work with you. We're going to release these people into our community so more of the people who live here can be raped, can be attacked, can be assaulted. I mean, it's just, it's not illegal for them not to help the federal authorities. They certainly can't hinder and they can't oppose. But what should happen under a natural order of things is that the people of the community should rise up.
I think they should.
And they should say, how dare you not protect us and our own communities by, getting rid of these people. But that's not what they're doing in these sanctuary places. So, but if there's any conflict between state and what they're trying to do and federal law, well, federal law wins because we do have a supremacy clause under the Constitution.
But again, your point you just made a minute ago, we talked about that the other day because there was a headline in New York Times that I read in which the violent crime rate is going down, but nobody knows why. And one of the posts on X was, so you deny the cause, but you believe in the effect. Because the argument being made was, well, this is why Trump shouldn't be sending troops to Portland and Chicago and Memphis and Washington, D.C., because the crime rate's down. No, that's the cause, but then you're using the effect to not to acknowledge the cause. And it's just a good illustration of the fact that you have such media bias, they won't even talk about the obvious.
I will say in Minneapolis, there's what you do and how you do it.
Yes.
And I'm afraid in Minneapolis that they were much more aggressive with the leader that came in there to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Trump saw this as really beginning to hurt him because of the media backlash and so forth, and the vision and the pictures and so forth. And so he changes the head, put Tom Homan in there. Tom Homan immediately cuts it back by 700, and now he's just announced, well, we've got this wrapped up, and they've been working with us. So I don't know, and I'm not in the middle of these discussions, so I don't know if the city said we wouldn't work with this guy, but we will work with Tom Homan, or if the other guy who was in, I can't remember his name, was being way too aggressive.
Or something like that.
And was being way too aggressive.
And Christine Noem,
and decided that you just created these roadblocks. So I don't know how this worked, but once Tom Homan got in there, things settled down an awful lot. And so this may have been a personality resistance as much as resisting what Trump was trying to do.
Well, and I've got to say, I totally read Tom Homan wrong. I mean, the first, year or whatever I saw the guy, he's not he's articulate, but he mumbles his words a lot, and he just seemed like this tough guy. I thought, I totally misjudged this guy because his press conferences, his statement, he really is masterful.
Yeah.
And his heart is good. It's for the right approach. And he lays it out real simply, and this is why he got what award did he get from Obama?
I read it off the other day, but I can't remember now. It was like a civilian award or something. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, he's done a great job, and so. But now he does say that President Trump has been the greatest president on that he's ever seen in doing what he does and making it very effective for the American people. But I got to give him credit. I mean, and that was a great move by Trump to bring him in.
Trump said we got to scale this back a little bit. I think that was right. And it also was not helpful that Christy Noem came out as soon as the shooting happened and says these are professional terrorists and other things. That just does not work. You need to let any responsible leader says we need to let the people look into this, investigate it. We'll come a transparent, impartial decision and come out and announce the results.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, was it Dave Rubin the other day says that if they're doing a movie on Tom Homan, they got to have Tom Homan play Tom Homan. Because I don't know anybody else like him, but he's pretty amazing. And since we were talking about this the other day, where people are going, we can't figure out why the violent crime rate is down. By the way, it's down in all 7 categories. So nothing like this has ever happened before. There was one the other day, and this is Babylon Bee. I'm doing this more for Kelly because he and I love Babylon Bee, in which they show these trans shooters, and they can't figure out why this trans shooter was doing what she did up in Canada. And at the end, they conclude that, well, the only thing they have in common is they're white. No, they're all trans. And that's another aspect of this violent crime issue, that the press will simply not cover these stories.
They're not doing it in Canada now. They're calling this guy a she.
Yeah. And so again, we're coming to a break, but it's just all the more reason why I hope we are your trusted source for news and information. We certainly encourage you to find some of the articles we've posted here, and we'll come back and get in some other issues. But this is amazing. I remember when we had some other guests on a program talking about the violent crime going down, but now all 7 categories of violent crime down, and we've never seen anything like this before. Partially also, let's give maybe some people at the FBI some credit for moving some of those individuals out of Washington, D.C. into that, and moving all of the military and as well as other National Guard. But if you take violent criminals who are here from other countries out of the country, you don't have violent crime. Pretty simple. Anyway, let's take a break. We'll come back and get into a couple of other issues. And if always you would find yourself wanting some of this news and information, we have posted quite a bit today on the Point of View website. Don't forget, still making available my booklet on gambling. There was a lot of gambling at the Super Bowl, and we recognize that that's become kind of a big issue, and we wrote about that earlier in the week. Sports gambling. We'll come back with more right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews, and I oftentimes say we should just leave the microphone on during the break because I mentioned sports gambling, and we got talking about everything from the Super Bowl, halftime, as well as the Olympics. So I thought we'd go around and let's put, first of all, the Super Bowl or the halftime on there first because that has been a controversy this week. And Kelly, if nothing else, we had some initial numbers. They were revising them, saying that not as many people watching the game, and a whole significant number of people decided not to watch Bad Bunny. So there you go.
Not surprising, obviously. When you do the Super Bowl, you might want to not be anti-America. You might not want to have profanity throughout, although in Spanish, or in Puerto Rican, so that people didn't know what you're saying. So, there's just a lot of problems with that. And then, so people offered an alternative. You had Turning Point offer theirs, and millions of people went to watch that. It's just a shame that they feel they have to do that to, I guess, increase their viewership, which I think it does the opposite. And so, disappointing. The NFL has disappointed in a lot of ways in the last, 10 years. In what they've been doing to try to promote themselves. Be sort of the leader of woke, which is so weird.
I know.
For,
Who would you guess?
These incredible athletes to, be in the middle of sort of, woke central by their leadership of what's going on there.
Well, I thought the choreography, the stage with the sugar cane and the buildings, I thought that was interesting. That was done from a visual standpoint very well. But this is a family show, and the dancers were doing some, let's say, family unfriendly kinds of things in the dancing and their actions in dancing. And my assumption was that some of the words were probably not appropriate for a family, but it was Spanish, so maybe it's. I don't understand I just don't understand the NFL's thinking in this. I would not be opposed at all if you had a show where maybe a song was in Spanish, because you do have a lot of Spanish speakers here. That wouldn't bother me at all. But this just struck me as an odd choice, and they've taken a lot of pushback from it. And what's interesting is I find at the end he says, "God bless America," and he shows a football saying "United Together" or something, "United America" or something, and they take it as God. He said, "God bless America," so that must be good. Well,
No, because his perception is all the Americas.
Yes.
At least they said.
Yeah.
But anyway, we could go on and on. We did talk about that. And the NFL picked him because he certainly has an enormous following. But
mostly
still,
not in America.
Yeah, that's not helping. But let's go around and talk about Olympics, because you also have some interesting connections there as well.
Yeah, one on the women's Olympic hockey team. One of the ladies there, Hannah Bilka, is from Coppell, where I live, and her parents, I know her mother, and they're all over there. The whole family went over, and they're enjoying 2 weeks in Milan as they're watching the game. And Hannah's done a good job. I understand, because I don't know the daughter, Hannah, but my understanding from people who know her is she is the nicest person in the world when you're talking to her, but she's a completely different person when she puts on that hockey uniform. And she's made some scores over there.
Yeah. Well, and also we have some ice skaters that have actually just changed everything, haven't they?
Yeah, it's been amazing with the backwards flip by the American skater. And there have been a lot of things that we haven't been good at that we're finally actually scoring a medal in for the first time. Curling and some of the thing. Norway kind of carries away all these, cross country
do really well.
Cross country skiing and et cetera, and some of these things. But we've got people who have really been working hard, and they've actually made their way in. Certainly, there's a lot left. The hockey, both men and women's team. It's amazing to see, children, it might even be grandchildren. Is it grandchildren? I think it's grandchildren of people that were in that famous, 1980 hockey miracle. Yeah. Now connected. They're there. Mm-hmm. They're a player. An alternate or whatever. It's been going on a long time. And America's actually gone from a team that really, it would be a miracle on ice for them to win, to actually now having
but
some of the very best people.
We had the best women's hockey team by far. I mean, it's just not even close anymore.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, we just thought we'd mention that in passing. And again, we will continue to watch the Olympics, and thought just a quick comment on that. But let me real quickly come to a piece that came out in the Christian Post. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Chip Roy, by the way, he's running for Attorney General, I believe, but he's a representative in the state of Texas, talking about the concern with Sharia law. So first of all, that brings us to a booklet we've done on Sharia law. But more importantly, I would love to get your thoughts not only about that, but then when it came time for the Democrats to speak, they said, well, we're not worried about Sharia law. We're worried about white Christian nationalism. Again, I don't know too many Christian nationalists. In this quote here, it even has one of these individuals who was saying, he's from Wisconsin, I routinely interact with conservative Christian groups, and I have yet to find anyone who is a self-avowed or even unself-avowed Christian nationalist. So if these are really dangerous people, I don't know who they are and where they are.
Yeah, I mean, look, people that use the word Christian nationalist, it's just a dog whistle for I hate Christian conservatives.
Yeah,
that's all it is. It makes no sense. You ask them to define it, everybody defines it differently. Because what they're trying to get is some sort of attempt that somebody wants to take over the country and force everybody to worship exactly like they believe, which nobody wants that. So it's just a way to kind of try to get people scared. The reality is that we are seeing things happen with Sharia law, and we look across the pond, yes. Mm-hmm. and we see what's happening overseas. We see what's happening in the UK and Great Britain. It's scary. Whole areas of London where you're not allowed to go if you're not Muslim. And we've seen lots of examples of those kinds of things. And now we see it in Dearborn, Michigan, calls to prayer and all these different things. And so people are raising this up, and they're wanting to make sure that whoever's in the United States needs to follow U.S. law, including the U.S. Constitution, not Sharia law, not whatever. If you ask me, though, where does the problem come from? The problem is not religion. The problem comes from immigration. And that is, we used to have a requirement that you had to assimilate. You had to be a person who wanted the values of America, and you were coming here saying that not that you're going to come here and then bring some foreign country approach and take over of whether it's local or state governments. That we need to go back to the people we let in the country. This is a melting pot, but it's based upon certain ideals. And if people are wanting to change those ideals, they shouldn't be in the country.
Again, we've always had, Polish Americans, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, whatever. We've had people that have come here from Japan or from Korea, from Vietnam, in this case coming from Middle East. But the desire was to be able to be an American citizen. And my wife and I know a Muslim couple, and we are the best of friends with them. And they want to be Americans.
Yes.
But they also bring over their friends so that they can speak Arabic. I understand that. And they're not as big about Sharia. They're really not big at all about all sorts of other practices. But that's very different than saying, I want to actually implement a compound, which will then violate the First Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment.
And I think we'll have to see how this plays out, because we do have Jewish areas where Orthodox Jews get together in a local area. And we pass through this when I go to my daughter in Brooklyn. We pass through one. It's very interesting because they have the Hasidic Orthodox Jewish.
Very true. Yeah.
But they practice their faith within that area. They're not trying to force their faith or practices on anybody else. So that's an important distinction. And to what extent Sharia law ends up trying to force it on everybody else, that becomes a problem. So I don't know if you're a Muslim and you're saying we want to live in an area where we're practicing our faith, but we're still living under U.S. law and we're not trying to force it on anybody else. That may be one thing, but it's just not clear to me how. I'm sure there are many Muslims, and you know some, I know some, that are fully integrated in the U.S., and we don't have any problem with them, and they have their faith and I have mine. But I don't know what's happening with the immigrants.
Yes. And again, back to the point, we know a number of Muslims that served with distinction in the U.S. military, and you've talked about that before. You have people on the Religious Liberty Commission. You have actually defended Muslims, haven't you, Kelly?
Yeah. And but gosh, I'm missing all those Christian nationalist communities that are popping up with new sets of laws. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't been reading the news enough.
Yeah, well, we were having a little bit of fun with that. But again, this is a piece in the Christian Post. And again, it's just, like you said, it's just a dog whistle. And just stop saying Christian nationalists, because what you mean is, I don't like evangelicals. Okay, at least be honest about it. But they don't define the term, so then it can be used against as many people as possible.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll take a break. Penn and Dexter's written about the issue of abortion and gender. We'll talk about that right after this.
At this year's D.C. March for Life, Vice President J.D. Vance announced the historic expansion of the Mexico City policy, which prevents federal funds from going to groups that perform abortions overseas. Pro-life administrations have maintained and reinstated the Mexico City policy since President Reagan initiated it in 1984. When pro-abortion presidents enter office, they rescind it. The edict sets the tone for the values the American government will export in its foreign policy, in effect answering the question, will we consistently promote a culture of life? The Center for Family and Human Rights, CFAM, states that the Trump administration's sweeping new rules close funding loopholes in previous versions of the Mexico City policy and triple the amount of foreign aid affected by the restrictions. The new policy extends beyond abortion-related aid. CFAM's Lisa Correnti reports that as of February 26, 3 directives will go into effect addressing abortion, gender ideology, and DEI, respectively. Collectively, these will comprise the Promoting Human Flourishing and Foreign Assistance policy. Vice President Vance told the marchers that the Biden administration sought to export abortion and radical gender ideology all around the world. He says that's not our job. It's our job to promote families and human flourishing. The new directive on gender ideology prohibits funding for sex-rejecting procedures or sex-rejecting social transition for children and adults. Lisa Correnti explains that the ban includes any resources or counseling that advises this treatment for gender dysphoria and all promotion of gender ideology through lobbying, education, public campaigns, drag queen shows, or any other means. According to the new directive on DEI, U.S. foreign assistance will not go to any programs that treat people as members of preferred or disfavored groups rather than individuals. Opponents call the new policy an attempt at global social engineering. The sexual left is appalled at being deprived of the pot of money they were using to bully developing countries into adopting their life-destroying agenda. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention real quickly that on our website today, you can, of course, download the commentaries, Penna Dexter's commentary, which we always post there on abortion and gender spending, which has been curtailed. We'll get to that in just a minute. Mine today is on social media and mental health. And if you aren't already receiving the commentaries, and I was surprised, I have, as I've traveled around, we've been in a number of places. Last week we were in Georgia, been in California, been in Illinois, been in Michigan, been all over Georgia, South Carolina. We have found that a lot of people have been listening to Point of View and don't know that they can receive the Viewpoints commentary free of charge. So just take the time, if you would, to just on the left-hand side, click on See More or Read More, and there's a place where you can sign up to get the Viewpoints commentary, and it's available. We'll get to that in just a minute, but Kelly, I always like to end with our prayer requests, but in some respects, I want to put that first because we have your case, which involves an individual who was an evangelist, Gabe Olivier. You have the Alliance Defending Freedom has a couple of cases there as well, one having to do with pregnancy resource centers. And we have this big case about tariffs coming down, and the Supreme Court's about ready to actually release some of their opinions, aren't they?
Yeah, next Friday, February the 20th, they're going to be releasing opinions, as well as the Tuesday after that and the Wednesday after that, the 24th and the 25th. That's a lot of days very quickly, kind of in a row. And so I think we're going to see a number of decisions coming down. I would encourage people to pray. Certainly for our case, it's about the right to share the gospel.
Yes.
And
you've never had a case like that before, have you? Yeah.
No. It's very unusual in a lot of ways. Number one, the idea that you would put a guy in handcuffs because he's sharing his faith, and number two, that then you wouldn't allow him to bring a case in court, which it's just bizarre. But that's what's going to be handed down eventually. I don't know if it'll be these 3 days because we just argued it in December. It would be pretty quick, but certainly there's a chance to get a strong 9-0 decision, and if that were to happen, it's possible. But I think things like the tariff case, which really needs to come down, some of these other cases, typically on the real controversial cases, they wait until June, and they hand that down because that's right about when they're closing the session and they leave. But yeah, we could be surprised. But I definitely think there was an emergency timing on the tariff decision. And so I things like that probably they'll be a press to come out with if they can. And so the fact that there's 3 days of opinions here coming up in a little over a week, well, starting a week from today and then days after that, that's something to be praying about and keep your eyes open for.
Is there a number? I mean, if they're doing opinions and releasing, do they have 3, 5, 10? Could it be 20? Any number?
It won't be that many. I mean, typically, even when they do a lot, it's like 4. Mm-hmm. So even that's typically at the end when they've got these opinions to get out before they close the session at the end of June. So, but the fact that they've made it to be 3 days means it's probably not 1 because it's at least 3, and
so it could be a 2 or 3 each day.
It could be, it could be a number of them.
Well, I know that next Friday we have Jeff Mateer with us, so if it is your case, we can talk with him. 2 weeks from now, you're back here again, yes. And if it's on tariffs, get close to your phone. Dr. Matthews, because we may want to talk about the tariff issue, which we have before. So we will see how to sort that through. Real quickly, I think all of us have read that, but Kelly, you commented positively towards Penna Dexter's piece, reminding us the fact that we have had spending for abortion curtailed, that's so-called medical city policy, but also we've been talking about this whole issue of gender spending, which is curtailed, and anybody that says elections don't matter just needs to look at how that has affected these two cases because of who we have in the White House right now.
Yeah, it's made a big difference, obviously, but I mean, it hasn't made as much as we would like because you still have Congress. And even though you have a Republican Senate and House and a Republican president, you still have the 60-vote rule in the Senate.
Yeah.
So the ability to really cut spending and things like that are still not possible. And so we've got this real quagmire. I think it's hard to get anything done in Congress, and it doesn't matter really who has control. I mean, they're not going to be able to get anything done. And so this has been the big thing. But we've got a president who has been obviously very aggressive about exercising executive authority, and that's why there's been a number of lawsuits on this, right? Whether it's Doge or all these other things that have been going on, and so he has done a lot of things that other people have not done to try to get spending under control. He's got a very bright OMB director, Russ Vought, who, by the way, had a guy try to assassinate him, right? Come to his house.
Yeah.
And so it's significant what's going on. But boy, I think the American people want a lot more. They would like all this fraud money and all this stuff back in their pocket, not taking it to misuse it for these crazy things, this gender ideology stuff, and certainly not for all the fraudulent uses that they're uncovering, at least so far in Minnesota and California and probably across the country.
Well, the federal deficit for last year, the 2025, was $1.77 trillion. The GAO has just come out with its estimate for the next 10 years, and it's usually looking at around $2 or a little more trillion each year as a budget deficit. So we're looking at a lot of spending unless they can figure out ways to cut that spending. And I don't know, Kelly. I don't see Republicans. I hear them talking about cutting spending. I don't see them pushing that very much. So we need to get the spending down because the federal debt is what, 38 trillion now? Is that right? 38 trillion, and could easily be another 10 or 12 trillion in 10 years if we're not careful.
Tuesday, we're doing a little piece on the end of empires because you have everybody from Victor Davis Hanson to a Swedish expert, Norberg, and others that have written about what is it that causes nations to decline. And part of that has to do with running up the debt and not being able to pay for it. As Johann Norberg, for example, said, Romans were real good at fighting wars, but they weren't very good at entitlement reform. Is a nice way to say that. So we recognize that that's an ongoing issue. That's on Tuesday, but on Monday we might just mention Nathan Sheets. Some of you guys know him. We'll be talking with him about some of the issues, and Jerry Newcomb will be with us as we talk about some of the history as well. So it'll be a very good week. But first of all, let me encourage Kelly for people to be praying for you. We have, of course, have our Pray for America events, and certainly one aspect of that is to go where your picture is. Click on that. Takes you to firstliberty.org. Scroll to the bottom. I've encouraged people to actually get part of what is called the FLI Insider, and that is something we've been quoting from today. Dr. Merrill Matthews, I know you got a piece coming out in Newsmax, so I'm going to use that next week, even before you come in here to talk about that. And your premise is very good. If we've got all this fraud happening in this country, just imagine what happens when we send it overseas, right?
Because you don't have nearly the oversight there, and you've got countries that are just very corrupt that get the money. And it's not to criticize all NGOs that do this, but you're in countries where fraud is rampant and corruption.
Well, again, I would encourage you to enjoy like what we have been enjoying, the Olympics. We have more to watch. And since we know some of those individuals, that was kind of fun. Even watching the Super Bowl, wasn't it interesting? The best defensive player and the best offensive player, both from Texas. Matter of fact, one from just down the road right here at Rockwall. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Texas proud, I guess, on that. Although the Super Bowl wasn't so proud for any sort of Texas teams. It was mainly the West Coast.
Yeah, it certainly was. Well, anyway, I thought if nothing else, we would encourage you to enjoy the weekend. We'll join you again back on Monday. As always, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Visit the website, pointofview.net. You can find our viewpoints, commentaries, our free booklet, and all the articles we've talked about today. We look forward to seeing you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up, but we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.